Both of my brothers are unsaved. One believes there is no such thing as sin, therefore there is no need for a Savior. How do I answer this question? How do I explain sin?
Steal his wallet.
Yes, it's another drive time video with ambient noises and all. And I'm driving a stick shift, so you get to hear even more bothersome sounds. But hey, I don't exactly have much time to sit around making videos in padded studios or even be alone at my house doing it, so this is what we get. So I wanted to talk about the secret of atheism. And the biggest secret about atheism is that it is not about God's existence or lack thereof. That's secondary. The primary issue is well elucidated by considering, just as one of endless examples, Richard Dawkins and his statements about Allah, the God of the Quran, his inflammatory, condemnatory, emotive, besmirching comments about, did I say Allah, the God of the Quran? Oh, of course he would never say any such thing about Allah, the God of the Quran. Of course not. I mean, can you imagine that? The fact that we can't even imagine it, the fact that he couldn't even imagine it, that tells you a lot. And actually, that brings us to a sub-secret of atheism, and that is that primarily, atheism is an anti-Christian support group. Okay, so we might as well just play a little clip to allow Richard Dawkins to speak for himself, specifically about whom? Allah, the God of the Quran? No, the God of the Bible. So here's what he has to say.
You have written that God is a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people.
No, I didn't say quite that. I said something rather better than that.
Oh, well, please tell us what you said. Please tell us what you said.
Well, I would have to read it from the book.
No, please.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, given his perception of the God of the Bible, what do you think would happen, pray tell, if it could be proven to him 100% that that is the one and only true, living, existing God? Well, likely Richard Dawkins would reject that God. Not reject that God's existence anymore, but would reject him, would not want to worship him, would still go on condemning and besmirching him. So see, that is the point. It is not primarily about evidence or proof or God's existence or lack thereof. It is primarily about rebellion against God and hatred of God. And it is that rebellion and hatred that lead to the rejection, that lead to the claim that God doesn't exist, or lead to the claim that not enough evidence, not enough evidence. So that's the real secret to atheism. And now keep in mind, incidentally, and it's not just an incidental, actually this is key. Keep in mind that Richard Dawkins is condemning the God of the Bible in all those terms without providing a premise upon which to make that condemnation. And that's the biggest problem he has, is that if it came down to it, and if we were to grant that God did all those things that Dawkins notes, upon what bases would Dawkins condemn God for those actions? besides, oh, I just feel like it, or, well, who knows? I think the closest Dawkins has gotten to moralizing on that level of presenting a premise is to appeal to the moral zeitgeist, right? The moral spirit of the age. Well, this is possibly the worst concept to which you can appeal, because to appeal to the moral zeitgeist is to admit that morality changes. It changes over time. And I'm going to just stop here to make a point about how I have elucidated the difference between morality and ethics. And that's a very important distinction, and I'll put up a link so you can take a minute to watch that video. Because a lot of questions could come up that are answered just by defining our terms, so I don't want to deviate at this moment. So the point being, Dawkins believes that morality changes, and therefore, according to the moral zeitgeist of our age, he is justified in condemning God for those things. Well, the hole he has dug for himself is that he has admitted that way back when those things were happening, it wasn't immoral. He can only say that by today's standards, they're immoral. Well, that means he's done. I mean, he has no basis upon which to condemn those actions because they were not immoral back then. So what if they're immoral now? They weren't back then. And so this moral zeitgeist concept, it does not allow you to condemn anything that has ever happened in past history. Moreover, you would have a hard time condemning anything even today, because for all you know, even as we speak, even as those condemnatory statements are coming from your mouth, maybe that zeitgeist is changing, and that which you condemn today or at this moment is becoming moral, right? Right as you speak. And maybe that which today you consider moral, oh, it's changing to be immoral. See, it's ever changing. So it is not a premise, it is not a firm foundation. And so that's one of the big problems, is condemning God, hating God, rejecting God, based on just a fleeting, momentary concept. Just the morality du jour. Okay? Because, of course, the main problem with the moral zeitgeist is that as it changes, it can easily turn into the moral poltergeist. From zeitgeist to poltergeist. So that's the issue. Imagine Dawkins is confronted with the fact of the reality of the existence of the God of the Bible. Well, he would say, well, now I hate him even more and I reject him even more due to the fact that I can clearly see now that he does really exist and he's some kind of a monster, right? So God's existence is not the issue. So now, say Dawkins comes before this God during Judgment Day and says, I reject you. Well then, would God torture Dawkins for all eternity by forcing him to live in heaven with him? Or would he say, you know what, you want nothing to do with me? Have it your way. So, every atheist is a theologian. They may be good theologians or bad theologians, but they are theologians. So what they generally do is they construct a theological concept, right? So they imagine a God, and then they find ways of rejecting that God or attempting to prove that any such God does not exist. And when they succeed, that is, if they succeed, well, they will have only succeeded in disproving that concept of God which they have invented. For instance, I think there's a lot of really good arguments against God's existence or God's attributes. But then when I consider whether they apply and are good to use against the Trinitarian God, they fail. For instance, God was just all alone in eternity and therefore had to create beings with whom to have a relationship. See, that shows that God was lacking something. There was something missing. Well, you could certainly use that against many theologies, and I think it's a really good argument, but not with Trinitarian theology, because Trinitarian theology denotes that God, being three persons, has eternally enjoyed a relationship that is unified, since God is one, and yet diverse amongst the persons of the Trinity, so that there is no conflict. But anyhow, the atheist will construct a theology, even if they're trying to mirror, say, a biblical theology, but we all know how often they get that wrong, so they end up discrediting a caricature, a straw man, or a straw god. And so now we come to those atheists who call God out, or call out God. Actually, I couldn't remember what the hip pop common parlance is. Do they call God out, or do they call out God? I don't know, so whatever. I wrote it as is in the title. So, oh yeah, well, if God exists, then let him strike me dead right now. Kind of like this.
Happy? God's happy?
God is so not happy.
Oh, you know him so well. God, if you're not happy with me, hit me with lightning right now. What's up? What's up?
Well, you see, this taunting of God is actually based on their theology. And their theology on this point must run something to the likes of, if God is, then God has a short fuse and would therefore strike dead on the spot whoever challenges him in this fashion. That is a theological point of view. I mean, obviously, that's what it is. It presupposes that God has a certain character and a certain manner whereby he goes about doing things. That's theology. And so they presuppose that they can exhaust the patience of an infinite, eternal God in just 1 second, right? Or what they're doing is challenging God, as if, well, and if an atheist does that, then God is somehow required to reply. And by the way, if an atheist ever does that and they drop over dead, well, then there'll be an autopsy and it'll be found that their heart suddenly stopped and what have you. And there you go, you have a materialistic explanation. See, God didn't do it. It just so happens that they have suffered a stroke at the moment where they challenged God to cause them to drop over dead. So what's the point? I mean, this gets us into a deeper aspect of the secret of atheism, which is to make man a god, right? You will be as God. And of course, there's a good way to be like God, and there's a bad way to be like God. A good way to be like God would be such as when Jesus said, "Be ye therefore holy, just as your Father in heaven is holy." Well, of course we want to be like God. But then there's the bad way to want to be like God, which is to usurp God, to want to put ourselves over, up and above God, and to essentially become God's God, right? Because if the atheist demands that God strike them dead, then they're trying to get God to fulfill their will. So what happens when you imagine yourself as having charge of God? Well, you're trying to become God's God. And so that's part of atheism, is knocking down any and all transcendent authority over you, doing away with it so that you can experience the consoling delusion of absolute autonomy. So you can experience the consoling delusion of lack of ultimate responsibility. And of course, by autonomy, I don't mean that they would imagine themselves to not be subject to natural laws, but in this sort of transcendent way in which they're autonomous from any deity that could in any way know that which they think or would condemn them in any way whatsoever. So you'd see it's the atheist attempting to be above God and say, no God will tell me what to do. No God will correct me or condemn me or judge me. You see, it all comes down to the same thing. It's like this might be a sloppy terminology, but it's a sort of atheist replacement theology whereby the atheist will reject the one true living God and put himself in the place of God, right? I am the ultimate authority. I decide. Captain of my soul, and so on. And so those are the basic and major points I wanted to make, which is one, it's not about God's existence or lack thereof, or evidence or lack thereof. It's about rejection due to rebellion and hatred. It's about atheism being an anti-Christian support group. It's about the atheist constructing characterizations and straw men by means of their own theologizing and discrediting that theology which they themselves have invented. And it's about seeking to do away with God to the point where they want to be over God and above God, usurp God to the point where they will tell themselves that God does not even exist. Or that, well, since there's no evidence to prove God's existence, I might not be able to prove that he doesn't exist, but I'm going to live my life as if he doesn't, okay? You get the meaning there? I'm going to live an autonomous life where I'm going to just tell myself that there is no God who could tell me I'm wrong, or pat me on the back, or bless me, or curse me, or judge me, or anything. And these are some of the basic things to keep in mind when we're dealing with atheists. And of course, if you take a biblical view, you need to love atheists and pray for them. If you consider them your enemy, you are to love them. If you consider that they spitefully use you and abuse you, you are to love them. If you consider them your neighbor, you are to love them. And they're not any different than any other person. We are to love all people, even our enemies, even those who do us wrong, and even those who spitefully use us and despise us. In fact, we're to love those people even more because they obviously need it.
What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up?